The sound came first, the sirens, the screaming and the crackling of fire eating through the streets of Dar es Salaam. Then came the silence that always follows chaos, the kind that makes you realize a nation is breaking apart. Tanzania is burning. And this time the flames are not only in the markets or the roads, they are creeping dangerously close to the president's own home. What began as a small protest against new restrictions and political control has turned into something much deeper, a collective cry from a people who feel unheard, unseen, and unprotected. Across Arusha, Mwanza, and Dar es Salaam, crowds have taken to the streets, shouting the same haunting words, "Samia must go." For many Tanzanians, this is not just about politics. It is about betrayal, about a government that promised openness and reform, but delivered fear and silence instead. As buildings burn and social media explodes with anger, one can sense that this is no longer a protest. It's a reckoning, one where ordinary citizens are ready to challenge not just the power of the state, but the culture of silence that surrounds it. The question now is not whether the government will survive the flames, but whether the country itself can survive the loss of trust. Can Tanzania still find a path back to peace without tearing itself apart? And what happens when the very people once praised for their loyalty, artists, ministers, even the president's own family, become the targets of public rage? If you believe that the people of Africa deserve leaders who listen before the fire spreads too far, stay with us until the end. Because what is happening in Tanzania today could be the warning the entire continent needs tomorrow. It started quietly, as many revolutions do. A handful of young activists gathered in the center of Dar es Salaam holding cardboard signs that read, "We are tired of silence." Their voices were small, almost trembling. But within hours, the air was filled with smoke chants and the roar of thousands. The protests spread like wildfire across the country, from the commercial capital of Dar es Salaam to the cultural city of Arusha and the port hub of Mwanza. By sunset, major roads were blocked, tires burned in the streets, and tear gas filled the air. Shops shuttered, buses stopped running, and the once bustling neighborhoods turned into battle zones between citizens and the police. Eyewitnesses say the spark came from a new series of presidential decrees, tighter control over public gatherings, media licensing, and online commentary. To the government, it was about national security. To the people, it was the last straw. Many still remember when Samia Suluhu Hassan first took power. She was seen as a breath of fresh air, Tanzania's first female president, promising unity, reform, and transparency after years of political tension. But those promises slowly turned into restrictions. Journalists disappeared from public view. Youth leaders were arrested for inciting unrest. Radio stations were fined for simply asking tough questions. By the time the protests began, the frustration had been simmering for months. And on that day, it boiled over. In Dar es Salaam, protesters overturned police vehicles and set fire to ruling party offices. In Arusha, a government building was torched after reports of police brutality surfaced online. In Mwanza, young men carried the national flag upside down, a powerful symbol of distress and defiance. The chants echoed through the streets, "Samia must go, Samia must go." For the first time, the anger was not just directed at the government, it was directed at the very idea of power itself. The police response was immediate and fierce. Riot control units flooded the streets. Tear gas canisters burst in every direction, leaving people coughing, running, and covering their children's faces with wet cloths. Live bullets were not confirmed, but witnesses described hearing pops and seeing people fall. By nightfall, chaos reigned. Flames lit up the skyline of Dar es Salaam, orange, red, and black. Internet service slowed to a crawl as authorities reportedly tried to contain live broadcasts from citizen journalists. Yet nothing could stop the footage from spreading across TikTok, Facebook, and X. One video in particular shocked the nation, a man wrapped in a Tanzanian flag standing on top of a burning car shouting, "If they will not hear us, they will see us." It went viral within minutes, a symbol of defiance that turned into a rallying cry. By the next morning, the protests had evolved. They were no longer simply political. They were deeply personal. Ordinary Tanzanian shopkeepers, students, taxi drivers began to target symbols of privilege and power. Restaurants owned by government allies were vandalized. Luxury cars associated with ruling party members were burned. The line between political and social anger had vanished. Inside the presidential palace, silence. President Samia Suluhu had not yet appeared in public. Rumors swirled that she was in Arusha under military protection. State media aired old clips of development projects trying to project calm. But the streets were already speaking louder than any press release. And so within just 24 hours, Tanzania had changed. A country once known for peace and quiet diplomacy was now in open confrontation with itself. No one could predict where it would go next, but everyone could feel that something had broken something far deeper than glass or concrete. The fire reached higher the next day, not just in the streets, but in the heart of Tanzania's ruling circle. The crowd's anger, once directed at government buildings and police barricades, began to shift toward the people who symbolized the system itself, the president's inner circle, her allies, and the powerful few who had grown wealthy while the nation struggled. In the early hours of the morning, video footage began to spread online showing a luxury hotel in Arusha engulfed in flames. It belonged to Abdul Samir Hassan, the president's son. Protesters accused him of flaunting wealth while ordinary citizens couldn't afford basic goods. His recently purchased Toyota Alphard, a symbol of privilege, was set ablaze outside the hotel gates. That image became the turning point. The people were no longer afraid of symbols of power. They were ready to destroy them. From there, the fury rippled outward. In Dar es Salaam, the restaurant Shishi Food owned by pop star and influencer Shilole was attacked and torched. She had once proudly posted photos with Samia Suluhu during the election campaign, calling her the mother of the nation. Now her restaurant was reduced to ashes. Then came Nangatronics, a popular electronics chain linked to another celebrity influencer who had openly campaigned for the ruling party. Looters broke through the glass walls, emptied the store, and left graffiti that read, "We supported you and you betrayed us." It didn't stop there. In the southern city of Mbeya, buses belonging to Esther Coach Company owned by the finance minister were burned to the ground. Overnight, the country's roads turned into graveyards of charred metal and twisted steel. Online, the digital uprising matched the chaos in the streets. Tanzania's biggest music stars, Diamond Platnumz, Harmonize, and Zuchu, saw their social media pages flooded with hate comments. Millions unfollowed them in a single night. Hashtags like "Ron, we're not entertained" and "You delete your lies" trended across the region. In one of the most symbolic moments, Diamond Platnumz, once a vocal defender of President Suluhu, deleted every photo and video that showed him supporting the government. But for many Tanzanians, it was too late. "He danced while we cried," one protester shouted on a live stream viewed by hundreds of thousands. The fury became personal, almost ritualistic. Deleting posts was not enough. People demanded confessions, apologies, and repentance. "Face the people," the crowds chanted. "Say her name and say you were wrong." Meanwhile, the police force seemed overwhelmed. Officers were filmed retreating from mobs or quietly watching as buildings burned. For some, it was fear. For others, perhaps silent sympathy. The state's grip on control was slipping by the hour. Across the country, a strange duality emerged: chaos and clarity. Chaos because no one knew where the next fire would start. Clarity because for the first time people understood their own power. In Arusha, a man on a megaphone shouted, "We are not enemies of the government. We are enemies of greed." His voice cracked, but the crowd roared in agreement. International journalists began arriving, trying to capture the scale of what was happening. Tanzania, long praised as one of Africa's most stable nations, was now front-page news for all the wrong reasons. By evening, the government finally broke its silence. A stern-faced police commissioner appeared on national TV, declaring that anyone found participating in vandalism will face the full force of the law. But his words sounded hollow against the backdrop of burning buildings and screaming crowds. The government's silence had allowed something irreversible to unfold, a movement that no longer feared the consequences. The line between politics, art, and survival had dissolved. And as night fell once again over Dar es Salaam, the question was no longer whether Tanzania would change, but how much it would have to burn first. By the third day, Tanzania was no longer the same country. The smell of smoke had become part of the air. Streets that once bustled with traders and schoolchildren were now lined with burned-out vehicles and the echoes of sirens. For ordinary citizens, life had changed overnight. Buses stopped running, food deliveries halted, markets closed as vendors feared looting, hospitals overflowed with people injured by tear gas, rubber bullets, or simply trampled in the chaos. Mothers carried their children through the haze, trying to find safe passage home. The government imposed a curfew in all major cities, unofficial yet enforced with brutal clarity. After sunset, any movement drew suspicion. Police checkpoints sprouted at every major intersection, their flashing lights painting red and blue scars across the night. But the greater wound was invisible trust. Trust between the government and the governed had collapsed completely. Citizens no longer believed the official statements aired on state television. Instead, they turned to live streamers, local journalists, and anonymous accounts on social media to piece together the truth. Every video, every rumor became part of a collective investigation into their own country. When the president finally appeared in a brief televised address, her tone was calm but her face looked weary. "Tanzania is our home," she said. "Violence will not bring peace." Yet the people watching from their darkened homes no longer heard reassurance. They heard distance, a gulf between power and pain that words could not bridge. Civil society fractured. Opposition leaders accused the government of deliberately fueling the unrest to justify a nationwide crackdown. Meanwhile, members of the ruling party CM began turning on each other, blaming poor communication, corruption, and arrogance for the collapse in public order. In the capital, secret meetings were reportedly held among senior advisors, debating whether a temporary state of emergency should be declared. Some warned that such a move would only ignite a new wave of resistance. Others argued it was the only way to prevent the total collapse of authority. Meanwhile, international organizations like the Red Cross and Human Rights Watch began releasing early reports documenting over 120 injuries, dozens of arrests, and multiple cases of property seizure without warrants. But the numbers didn't tell the full story. The real crisis was moral, a nation at war with itself. In the days that followed, a quieter kind of resistance began. Neighborhoods formed volunteer patrols to protect local markets. Teachers organized informal classes in church halls so children wouldn't lose their schooling. Religious leaders, Muslim, Christian, and traditional, called for a national day of mourning and prayer. For the first time in years, Tanzanians were united not by politics, but by shared grief and exhaustion. The rebellion in the streets had subsided, but the rebellion in the heart had only begun. Some began whispering a dangerous thought: if the government cannot protect us, maybe it should not lead us. And beneath that whisper lay an even deeper fear that the violence had changed something permanent in Tanzania's spirit. The peace the country once took pride in was no longer certain. It had been traded for anger, for survival, and for a fleeting taste of freedom. When the fires began in Tanzania, the world was slow to look. The headlines were dominated by other crises: Gaza, Ukraine, the U.S. elections. For days, international media treated Tanzania's unrest as a regional disturbance, not a warning of something much deeper. But silence can be revealing. In Washington, officials at the State Department quietly requested updates from the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam. There were no statements, no press briefings, just monitoring the situation closely. It was the kind of cautious language used when an ally is in trouble. Tanzania has long been considered one of East Africa's most stable partners, a nation praised for peacekeeping, steady economic growth, and quiet diplomacy. For the United States, it was a symbol of order in a region often marked by chaos. Yet, what happens when that very symbol catches fire? Privately, American analysts began drawing comparisons between Tanzania's unrest and the youth uprisings seen in Sudan, Nigeria, and Kenya. A senior African affairs scholar at Georgetown reportedly remarked, "We're watching the end of the old social contract in Africa." That statement captured the unease rippling through Western policy circles that the so-called stable African nations might not be stable at all. In Europe, the reaction was mixed. France and Germany issued formal condemnations of violence and vandalism, emphasizing the need for dialogue. The United Kingdom called for restraint from all sides, yet none addressed the deeper issue: the widening gap between African governments and their own citizens. Meanwhile, in Africa itself, the silence was heavier. The African Union avoided direct criticism of Samia Suluhu's government, while neighboring leaders offered only vague words about maintaining peace. It was as if no one wanted to admit that the fire in Tanzania could easily spread beyond its borders. But one leader broke that silence. In Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré reportedly told his cabinet, "When a people rise, they are not the enemy. They are the conscience of a nation that has been ignored for too long." His words, though not officially broadcast, echoed across social media, where many young Africans saw Tanzania's protests not as chaos, but as awakening. To Western diplomats, such rhetoric sounded dangerous, the kind that challenges traditional influence. But for millions of Africans, it sounded like truth. American commentators began asking uncomfortable questions. Why does Washington continue to support governments that suppress dissent in the name of stability? Why are billions in foreign aid flowing to nations where journalists disappear and protesters are jailed? In the end, the U.S. had to confront its own contradiction, preaching democracy abroad while quietly backing regimes that undermine it. As footage of burning cities in Tanzania reached global networks, one truth became impossible to ignore. Africa's young generation is demanding accountability, not charity. They are no longer waiting for permission to speak or to fight back. For many in the West, it was a shocking reminder that the post-colonial illusion of control is fading fast. And as one American commentator put it on live television, Tanzania's fire may be local, but the message is global. You cannot silence a generation that has already found its voice. As the smoke begins to clear over Dar es Salaam, the true cost of the unrest is finally visible not in the ashes of burned buildings, but in the faces of those who survived. Mothers clutching their children, vendors staring at the remains of their small shops, police officers sitting silently by the roadside unsure of which side they now stand on. Tanzania has seen many storms before, but none quite like this. This one was not driven by foreign invasion or economic collapse. It was born from silence, from promises made, and broken from the simple human desire to be heard. And yet, even in the ruins, there is a strange kind of hope. A teacher in Mwanza told a reporter, "Maybe this is how a nation learns to listen again." Her words carried more truth than any official statement. Because what burned in Tanzania was not just property, it was illusion. The illusion that peace can exist without justice. Across the continent, other leaders are watching closely. From Nairobi to Abuja, from Khartoum to Lusaka, they see the same tension rising, the same young faces, the same demands, the same anger. And they know what this means. Africa is entering a new age of accountability. But the question remains, who will guide it? Will it be those who fear the people or those who rise from among them? In Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré has become a symbol of that new kind of leadership, one that listens before it commands, one that rebuilds instead of represses. His message of sovereignty and unity now echoes far beyond West Africa. And for many, his name has become synonymous with what Africa could become if courage replaced fear. Tanzania's crisis, painful as it is, might yet serve as the mirror the continent needs. Because every nation must at some point choose between control and compassion, between maintaining order and restoring dignity. So as the fires dim and the world turns its attention elsewhere, we must ask, what kind of Africa do we want to leave behind? One built on fear, or one rebuilt on faith in its own people? If you believe that the voices of ordinary Africans, mothers, teachers, and youth matter more than the silence of power, then share this message. And if you believe that truth should be louder than propaganda, then subscribe, stay aware, and never stop asking the hard questions. Because the story of Tanzania is not over, it is the beginning of something far greater. And whether we admit it or not, the fire has already spread.